everyone. Welcome to another episode of Film Seizure. I'm Jason Oliver, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-hosts over there in the internet worlds. I'm seeing them through space and time, and they are Jeff Arbuckle. Hey, you there, Jeff?
Yes, I am here. How's it going? I was trying to figure what the Russian greeting is, and it completely. So I'll just say "da."
Or Nostrovia.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah,
the Russian cheers, right?
Vodka.
Not the Russian Boston-themed bar cheers, but
all right, Das Vidanya, fellas.
And then there he is, Das Vidanya, from our other guy, Chuck. So this is a first, I think, for the podcast this month. We have a theme. Not the first time we've had a theme, but the first time we've had this theme.
Well, it's the first time we've done. This is kind of a loose theme. I mean, it is. We've kind of clumped together all of this. This isn't the first time that this situation has happened.
Sure.
One of our favorite early discussions was one of these, and hopefully this month will produce another The Rage.
Oh yes, that was our first recommendation that we took from a coworker of mine. Yeah, that was a good choice. But we decided we've always asked our listeners to send us suggestions for movies, and they have started to trickle in. So we decided, well, let's do a month of recommendations. Now, granted, 3 of these 4 recommendations are from family members.
Well, but Four of the five. There's 5.
Wait, there's 5 this month?
There's 5 this month. Well, one, I will say that definitely the last one is one that we would have done anyway, and it's just like, hey, let's go ahead and just clear it out. So
right. But anyway, this first one is kind of special because it is, I assume from a listener, it's someone named Nick who found our podcast and sent us an email and said, hey, guys, there's this movie that you've probably never heard of called The Beast of War, a.k.a. The Beast, that I think you should check out. It's a war film, and he said it's kind of like one of those movies that he discovered and it blew him away, and he's kind of shocked that it's not more well-known. And I got to say, after watching it, I kind of agree. It is kind of weird that this isn't more well-known.
What's interesting, though, also is that there are probably some very easy reasons why it kind of slipped away.
Well, it's hard to find anything about this movie from its production, but there are a few definite things that we'll talk about. I think that has lent its obscurity, if you will, obscurity. But so we said, you know what? That sounds interesting. We don't get many emails like this. Let's do it. And then it kind of kicked off an idea to do some more recommendations for the month. Yeah,
and this is also, I mean, this movie has a pretty fantastic cast, like a very good late 80s cast, and the production is fantastic. They spare no explosions, and I love that.
No, it is. Yeah, it's a pretty good movie. I mean, we'll get into it, but it was started as a pretty not totally well funded. I think it was only like $8 or $9 million budget, but
still in 1988, that's a mid range budget,
Sure, and it was a studio picture. It was it was Kevin Reynolds was the director, who later went on to make some big Kevin Costner blockbusters like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Waterworld. Waterworld's one we need to do at some point.
Fuck me, he made Robin Hood.
Oh, you did the Will Scarlet. you did. Oh my God! Hey everybody, special guest Christian Slater. Hey Christian Slater.
Oh, I thought it was Jack Nicholson. Oh.
I gotta tell you, I'm not real sure.
But anywho, yeah. So we checked it out. It happened to be on Amazon Prime for free. It still is.
It's everywhere on digital. It's just Prime has it for free.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, we watched The Beast of War, And war movies aren't really like a film seizure thing so much. War movies are kind of a type of movie that has worn on me as I've gotten older. Haha, worn on me. But I didn't, that was an unintentional pun, sorry. But and I was a little hesitant about this one, especially in the first 10 to 15 minutes. I was like, am I going to be able to make it through this movie? So this is definitely, I think, a departure for us in a lot of ways to talk about a war film.
Yeah. And no time like the present, right?
Right.
Like I actually had to create that tag when I created the post for this episode.
There's actually an interesting a bit of synchronicity here with the fact that we're recording this episode in April, so a couple months ahead. But it was just recently announced by the Biden administration that they are officially removing all troops, American troops, from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And in many, many, many ways, the topic of this movie, the events of this movie, were the precursor to our presence in Afghanistan. Now going on for what, like 2 decades?
Yeah, I mean, well, the Afghan war is almost 20 years. I mean, if we think about it, that essentially kicked off like within 7 or 8 months after 9/11, something like that. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Because I remember going to what was the name of our? I want to say Indy Fuel. I know it's not the fuel. But what was the name of our Firebirds? The Firebirds, the arena football team that we had.
Oh Jesus!
I remember going to a game of that in 2003, and like sitting there thinking while I was sitting there, it's like, now why did we go to Iraq? It's because because right around that time we had split. And had decided to attack Iraq as well as Afghanistan. So we've been in Afghanistan for almost 20 years. And
well, I mean,
but we've also
been in Afghanistan in various ways since
1979,
since the early 80s.
Yeah. We were major supporters of the Mujahideen, and that may have hurt us a little bit in the long run.
Well, for sure. We waged basically a proxy war against Russian communism via the Afghanistan people by supplying them with arms, supplying them with all sorts of things. It's kind of like one of those shadow wars, right? Because we were in the middle of the Cold War with Russia. We weren't at an outright war with them, but we were definitely moving behind the scenes to aid anyone who was fighting against the Russians. And it just so happened that there was this pretty significant war in Afghanistan.
Let's not pretend that 1990 ended our proxy wars.
Oh, well, no, I never said it did.
No. I'm just saying that it's like, yes, we have had a long history of this business. So,
but there was definitely, an end to the Cold War.
Yes.
And that shifted a lot of that, the enemy, the Russian enemy, was not really so much so anymore. It's starting to be one again, which is kind of weird. Another synchronicity, with the Biden administration this year again is effectively declaring sanctions on Russia, which is fascinating because we've come full circle again. We are, and for all intents and purposes, at the beginning of another Cold War with Russia. Yeah. So that's a little depressing. But anyway, our focus shifted from fighting as Russia as our enemy to the Middle East as our enemy. That became very clear in the years before and during the collapse of the Soviet Union.
I would also argue that we were not wholly in favor of the Afghans either.
Oh, no.
For various reasons that I think we can just imply here by just saying, But I think that only intensified after there was no reason for us to really be there anymore. The Russians were beat back and defeated. They had a new government come in that was no longer sympathetic to communism, and therefore we won. But we're glad you did it, but we don't really like you either. Yeah, it's kind of one of those unfortunate things about the Middle East is that we how do I put this without going down too far of a rabbit hole here? But no, we have interests that we want to protect, but we don't really like the people there as a country, especially depending on power.
Well, that's, I think, leads into why this movie to me is so interesting. Is it's a pretty rare American-produced war film that that it doesn't have any actual Americans in it, right? It's about, and what's funny too is it's about Afghanis and Russians, and none of the people in the movie are Russian or Afghanistan. Right. Like, no, it is. So it's like, it's really weird. It's a weird movie, but you wouldn't see a movie like this where, especially a movie about the Afghan war between Russia and Afghanistan. That's a pretty short list. First and foremost, and then to
be honest with you, I didn't even know really who the Mujahideen were until The Living Daylights, and even then, it was watching it like, I don't know, last year when I was. It's like, oh, they were just the people who didn't like the Russians in that movie. I never connected it that was the rebellious force against the Soviet in the war that was happening in that area of the world. I never connected that, and yet it's just one of those things that it's like, we just don't talk about that, but we did a thing for. And let's be honest, we probably talked a lot less about it over the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm. It's a fairly agnostic movie too. It doesn't really take. It does take a side, I feel. It probably villainizes the Russian side in this, and that's probably the 80s Hollywood component of it. But at the same time, it shows brutality on both sides.
Yes, it's
and it shows empathetic characters on both sides.
Yes, this is a movie in which both sides are simultaneously the protagonist and the antagonist. Mm-hmm. And so that makes for a very complex movie, because then you have to, if both sides are that as a whole, now you got to get under the umbrella, and you got to start looking at the individuals in that. And Chuck, you brought this up last night. So I think we should have Chuck come in here and talk about some stuff too, since we've kind of dominated.
Chuck also mentioned before we started the episode, Das Beast, which I don't know if he was directly thinking of Das Boot, but this movie is very much a Das Boot movie for various reasons. So I'm hoping that's something that Chuck wants to talk about too.
Yeah, maybe. What did I mention last night, Jeff? I kind of lost the thread on where you were leading me.
Yeah, both the Russians and the Afghans have an individual good guy.
Oh, yeah. So it's rare. Jason already said it's rare, but a movie where the war is basically second fiddle to the characters.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're in a war. They're fighting a war, but our concentration needs to be on them as people, right?
Yep.
Which a lot of times in war films, and Jason and I had kind of a circular, I won't call it an argument, just to talk about this, but last night. But there wasn't really, for me, or how do I say this? This is kind of hard to articulate. It was hard for me last night too. But since there are no Americans in this film, I was able to just dive into the people. I didn't have a dog. I didn't have a dog in the fight. I didn't, for a lack of a better way to say this, I didn't care who won. It was more about the characters and their actions and getting to that end point. And really, not to spoil anything, but nobody wins, right? Nobody wins in war. Nobody wins in this movie. We talk like people win wars, but everyone is dying, like, go ahead, Jason.
And I think what I was trying to articulate back was that even if it were, let's say, an American-Russian story or an American-Afghanistan story, I would have taken the same things away from this movie in that setting as I would of this. The fact that I didn't have a dog in the hunt, if you will, didn't really matter to me because, again, like you said, because it's the characters that are important.
Right.
It's not a black and white situation of good and evil, just or unjust war. It's just two sides who don't understand each other at all.
Yeah, let me pull back.
And then them trying to, there's some common ground trying to be reached between them, but also from the impetus of this horrific violence that occurs.
Right. Let me pull back just a little bit, because when we were talking, I don't want to imply that any one of us would have said, if the American tanks were in here, I'd have a different feeling about this film. Right. I was more talking about the general public and how people, I mean, we know why movies like Rocky are huge and Red Dawn are huge, and all these movies that elicit a nationalistic or a patriotic feeling for you. Right?
Or downright jingoistic. I mean,
yeah. So this movie, maybe it suffers from the fact that it didn't draw people in that had that attachment or emotional attachment to what was going on in the film. But the people that do see it and sought it out, us three namely, I think we're able to pull those things out of it. I really don't think a majority of people would. I could be wrong. Sorry, I didn't turn my phone down. But
I just don't agree with that. I think a lot of people would. I don't think that the reason this movie failed is because of the subject matter necessarily. I think it was part of it. I think that's part of maybe why it was buried. I don't think that when this movie came out during a studio head change. And when that happens, new studio head looks at the slate of films, and they have a different vision for what they want to make the studio. They have a different vision for what they think will be successful. And this movie just kind of fell on the cut line. It wasn't expensive enough to where they felt like they were going to lose a bunch of money on it, but they were afraid of, I think, and again, I don't know enough about it, but I know enough about how movies die in Hollywood to make some assumptions. And I feel like they didn't want to spend the marketing money on it because they didn't think it would get the rate of return that they wanted.
Is this a cult film now?
Yes. No. Well, it's a little bit. It has a tiny bit of. Again, it kind of comes down to it is. I would say that yes, it is, if you know how to find it. And normally how people are finding it are people like through Roger Avery. If you know stuff about Roger Avery, or you go to, as Nick said in his email to us, Roger Avery's Letterboxd has this as his favorite movie of the year. So that kind of person pulls a lot of film nerd in with them. So it's something that if we really wanted to mine those types of lists, we might have one of us might have discovered it anyway, just because it's like, well, if Roger Avery says it's pretty good, it's got to probably be pretty good, huh?
Yeah, it's just weird to me.
I still don't know that I would call it a cult film, though.
But
I don't think it has like sorry, Chuck. I don't think it has like a large contingency of people. I mean, Nick is obviously in maybe the small cult of this movie, but it's not like a cult movie like, I don't know, like Cemetery Man.
Well, yeah, I asked that. Sure. I asked that because we've had 33 years to reappraise this movie, and for people to find it. It doesn't feel like, to me, with that amount of time and with a guy like Roger Avery supporting it, that it shouldn't be a cult film or have more reappraisals over the last 10 years. There's something else there that people aren't liking about this movie, at least to me. Maybe. I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not walking the streets and asking people, why aren't you touting this wonderful film? You'd think over 30 years it would get some kind of jumpstart, like movies that are buried by studios in the 80s do years later get huge cult followings.
I think part of that is that it's not a fun movie.
Right, it's definitely not a fun movie.
It's a good movie. but it's not a fun movie. And most cult films have an element of fun to them. I can't really think of many war films in general that are cult films. I'm probably way wrong. I wasn't prepared to really even think to talk about that, but there probably are few. But it doesn't feel like the type of movie that will lend itself to that type of following. If it didn't hit when it came out, if people didn't see it, people are gonna see it throughout the years. But I can't imagine there's ever gonna be like this groundswell of.
Wouldn't you think everyone who likes war films would see this though? And that's
if they're led to it. If they're led to it,
that's a huge contingency.
You'd have to really seek it out. I mean,
we
know a lot about movies. We know. I mean, we've seen a shit ton of movies.
You two know a lot about movies. I just spout my shit.
I don't.
This wasn't ever on my radar.
We had a disagreement about whether or not Canadian exploitation movies have a veneer of shit on them last night. So I don't know if I can be trusted either.
I'm even a Roger Avery fan, and I have never heard him talk about this movie.
Fair enough.
So it's like,
well, I mean, it's one of those
through the cracks.
It's one of those things where it's like, I feel like if you go through and you go to Amazon Prime and you say, okay, Amazon Prime, show me all your war movies, and you start watching them, and all of the contemporary ones. I'm not talking about like the John Wayne ones. Those are that's almost a whole different genre. But this is one of those things where it's like, maybe eventually this is going to show up, right? But it's probably relatively low because it's something that they, it just, I guess it depends on the algorithm, right? But
yeah, it's just weird to me. I mean, Jason Patrick, he had been in
he was already in Lost Boys,
right?
Yeah, he was already in Lost Boys.
Like, there are people in this movie that I think just their names would lead people to see it. But I know you guys can't solve this, and I don't even know if I'm necessarily making a point. It's just weird to me that it's stayed at that level for so long with the people. Like, I love Jason Patrick. I love Jason Patrick in this. I think I like him in everything I've ever seen him in. I didn't know about this.
I think you're a little bit onto something there, though, because Jason Patrick is the biggest name in this, and Jason Patrick was maybe a big star for like a second, right? I mean, he's never been like a Brad Pitt.
The moment he cut his hair, it was all over.
And he's been in some damn good movies, though.
Sure. And yes, he was in Lost Boys the year before, but I mean, that's a totally different audience.
Right, you're not going to bring out a lot of 17, 18-year-olds that love Lost Boys to see The Beast. I get that.
Yeah.
Like our age group, well, I was a little younger, but you know what I mean.
And even then, like, Jason Patrick isn't even, like, the most interesting thing in Lost Boys. I mean, Kiefer Sutherland, Corey Feldman, Corey Haim, far outshine Jason Patrick in that movie. Right.
Well, shit.
So
there is a single.
So what I'm getting to here is there is no star. What I'm getting to is there's no star in The Beast. That's probably another reason why the studio was like, what are we promoting here? There's no star, right? The studio heads are all about fucking stars. So anyway, I don't know.
What were you saying, Jeff?
No, I was going to say in the Lost Boys, there's one scene that outshines everybody in the movie. The saxophone man.
Oh hell yeah. Don't get Jason on that one. Then we'll talk about the Beast again.
So
let's talk about Tim Capella for the next
hour, please.
Love it.
Have I ever told you that I met him?
Man, I worry. I am going to talk about Tim Capella for a minute.
God damn it.
Oh, no.
Because that was one of the fucking pandemic shows that got canceled for me. I was going to see Tim Capello perform live at Black Circle here, a bar near my house, and it got fucking canceled. Oh, so sad.
I was going to see that too. That is very, very sad.
Anyway,
but,
all right.
No saxophone in The Beast that I remember.
No, there is not. There is not. But there's
some great like electronic,
there's some good
free jazz music going on though. Yeah.
So let's get into the first and foremost. I do prefer the title. I mean, this movie is known by two titles. It's The Beast and The Beast of War. I actually prefer The Beast of War, even though the Beast could be a direct reference either to the tank or to the tank captain.
Right.
But The Beast of War, I think, has a higher level purpose that I think both sides are fighting against. But we'll talk a little bit more about that.
I you know, it's interesting because I also like the simpler title, The Beast, because it I think you can interpret it farther than just the Beast of War, right?
Yeah, I think, yeah, but I think my preference for The Beast of War comes from what one of the big takeaways I had of the movie. But we'll get to that later. So the I guess real quick, let me say something before we get in, because the beginning of this movie is very tough. And I have not wanted to see a war movie in like 9 years. I want, or 9 or 10 years. I wanted to watch The Hurt Locker, and I have not wanted to watch a war movie since. It's not because of The Hurt Locker. It's not because, I mean, I did like the Hurt Locker an awful lot.
An awful bit.
An awful bit. Yes, an awful bit. An awful bit. You know, I'm just a small town podcast, and they're just talking here about.
I thought you were going to break into some melon camp there.
I did too. Damn.
It's like an old chili dog. Anyway, so yeah, but like, you know, I remember seeing Jarhead, and it was okay, you know, but it's like there is something, and this is something that I share very, very much so with my dad. It gets to a certain point where, you know, we've seen tough movies, and I've seen a lot of tough movies. I've sought out movies that are not easy to watch. I have seen movies that are not easy to watch, like a Serbian film. But at the same time, I get to a certain point where it's like, you know, I really don't want to see that anymore. And I kind of shy away from that. Like this year, the only Oscar nomination or nominee that I saw prior to this weekend's Oscars, which is kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit. We're filming this before even that happened. It was Mank. And, you know, it's like, I know the rest of them are tough, you know, and heavy concepts that I'm not drawn to that sort of stuff anymore. And war certainly falls into that. Now, that's not to say that there can't be movies that take place during a war that can appeal to me. Jojo Rabbit or The Darkest Hour. I wanted to see those movies because it's about a different story during a war. But the actual war stuff is very hard because I get to a certain stage where it's like, I don't know why I want to root for some of these people. And I also understand, and that's not me saying that I'm anti-military or anything like that. I mean, those people are doing something I could never do, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, there's a lot of undertone that is very difficult for me to cut through. And I almost want to be like, I know orders are given and orders have to be followed and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it's like, I don't really want to think about that, honestly. And I don't want to be in a situation where for 2 hours I'm thinking about that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't, you know, that I can't pierce through that from time to time. This is a movie where I could pierce through that. I had even said that this was a really, really engaging movie. Which is interesting because it's like you're on pins and needles literally the entire movie, because there's one guy on both sides that is ready to pull all the triggers all the time. And you never know when you're going to be safe from somebody who is overcome with whatever it is that they're mad about or whatever they've driven them crazy, basically.
Oh man, I've got so much to say now based on all of that. I don't know if we'll ever get to talk about the movie.
Okay.
because I also agree that I just can't. War movies are hard for me now for a lot of the same reasons. They're also difficult for me because there was this trend that started in the late 90s, early 2000s of just this overly nationalistic
Yeah.
viewpoint of the American wars, and then coupled with this sort of like horror element of killing soldiers creatively in multiples of ways. And I honestly blame mostly Mel Gibson and Clint Eastwood for this.
Sure.
And they're also conservative leaning people. So there's something there I think we could go into, but I don't necessarily think I want to.
No, I don't think we should.
But what's interesting that is I think before those movies were made, that it kind of started in some ways with Saving Private Ryan. But Saving Private Ryan is a profoundly anti-war film. Even in the context of World War II, which most would say was one of the most just wars ever waged.
Right. I would agree with all of what you just said there. Yeah. Well, and here's
so I've thought about that a lot, and there are certain movies that I can go back to and I can watch. Like I can watch Saving Private Ryan. That the D-Day sequence is difficult. It's very difficult. But once that really sets like a tone, it sets a place of a state of mind that you need to be in to understand the point that Spielberg is trying to make in that movie, right?
Exactly. And then you get to the final scene where it's basically, we sacrificed all of this stuff. I sacrificed all these men who had essentially survived the entire war with me. You better be worth it. You better do something with your life because people died for you. And there's a powerful statement there because it's and there is a thesis statement about halfway through this movie that also kind of has the same punch, I felt. And that line is, and then I'll just go ahead and say it because really this is the whole gist of the Beast, aka the Beast of War, aka the Beast. And that is, you can't be a good soldier in a rotten war. And that is, you have to look at it from the perspective of you have a deranged person commanding a tank battalion. And the people either have to do what he says or they're going to be shot dead on sight. On the other side, you have people who are desperate because they are getting invaded, and they are the ones who have to do things that they have never thought to do that would probably even be against their religion. Really, pretty much everything in war should be against every religion, probably. But it's this concept that you're going to see those people on the other side do some pretty horrific things as well, or be capable of doing horrific things, but from a different perspective. They are desperate because they don't believe in what's the other side wants them to kind of fold into, and they're going to fight for what for what they feel like their place is in their homes and in their homeland. So it's there is no possible way that every single soldier on both sides of this battle is going to come out being good. It's most of them won't be, to be honest with you, and most of them are also going to react to the heat of the moment too.
Yeah, this is a good entry point, I think, into our tank brigade characters, and also why I think this movie is so similar to Wolfgang Petersen's Das Boot. If this movie had been made by Russians, it would be the Das Boot of the Russian-Afghanistan war, because very much of what you're saying, Jeff, is World War II to a lot of Germans was a rotten war, right? They didn't necessarily believe in what they were fighting for, or what they were fighting because they were afraid of what would happen to them if they didn't, right? And that is a lot of what Das Boot unpacks, and that's a lot of what this movie Das Beast unpacks, right?
AKA
Plus,
Das Beast Dar War.
and if you want to even go there again, it all takes place within, the only safety is a tin can, right?
In the middle of a
So
desert, no less.
yeah, so instead of a tin can in the ocean, it's a tin can in the middle of the desert, right? So parallels are endless, honestly. But yes, let's talk about our principal players here in the tank.
Yeah,
It's
because
a
you
brigade, right? Like a
right.
tank brigade.
I think so. Yeah, it's a brigade, I think. But yeah, you get this right out. So the movie opens in a relatively, it almost looks like a Tony Scott type of picture.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like it's very hazy, but it's very tranquil and kind of beautiful, and it's all orangey, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's you're seeing this Afghanistan, this small town village, basically. The women are doing the laundry, and the men are bringing in the goats or whatever. It's all this stuff, and then everything starts exploding. You first hear what sounds like a plane, but ends up being an entire battalion of several tanks riding into town, just blowing everything to shit. And you're not saved from seeing what is killed. Literally, not just men, but women, children, goats, everything. And some people are some of the Russian soldiers that are coming in are more so than just blowing stuff up with their tanks, but getting out of the tanks, tracking down people and blowing them away, almost out of sport. If that could be like if shooting fish in a barrel could be a sport. These are people who have machine guns and tanks and rocket launchers against a people who literally up on a hill on the outskirt of the town have a giant rail gun. Basically, that's all they got.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of weirdly, the thing that comes to mind is the quote from Raising Arizona. He's cruel to the little things, and that's what this feels like, right? It's almost an indiscriminate destruction. It's not really war. This is just obliterating a village. It's genocide.
These people are paying a price for harboring the how do I say
Mujahideen?
Mujahideen fighters who aren't there at the time.
But they're not just like, they're killing their livelihood. Mm-hmm. They're poisoning the well, right?
Yeah.
It is despicable.
Yeah. And part of it, it's going to be somewhat. I can imagine as a Russian general or something, he'd sit down and say, well, we have to break their spirit. If we do these things and a calculated number of these things, they will surrender because they won't be able to handle the law. Well, that very rarely works in invasions. The British had done some pretty nasty stuff to us in a couple of wars. It didn't stop us from fighting them. Usually invading forces, unless you completely and totally steamroll them like the Germans did with their tanks in World War II, it's real hard to stop somebody from fighting, even with calculations like that, where you just go and you wipe out a town of the enemy's loved ones that have nothing to do with the fight other than that they're associated with the enemy.
Well, and you're creating more enemies as you do that.
Oh, this movie creates a whole gang of women who chase down the beast with the men.
Yeah, they reminded me of a group of women from Song of Ice and Fire, similar area, but I guess I shouldn't go into that. But the the snakes, Jason, I think they were called, the women from the South in Dorne that were fighters, and I don't know. I'll just leave that there.
We'll just leave it there on the table. If
But they were. I mean,
mix it up.
Yeah. I mean, you would argue that George R. R. Martin is probably inspired by a lot of sort of Middle Eastern culture for that part of his fictional world.
I wouldn't be surprised if he'd seen this movie because that's what those.
I don't know that it's the movie; it's just the culture.
No, I know. Never mind. Go ahead. I like how you have a 100% answer to my assumption that maybe he saw this movie. You're like, no, he didn't. He didn't see this. You don't fucking know that.
Oh my god. Okay, guys, let's
I'm joking around.
Let's prevent a war here. Chuck lobs a fucking missile or something towards Jason's house, blows up.
Fucking RPG me.
I'm gonna RPG you. I'm gonna kaput your house.
Kaput your house, yeah. So so basically they come in and they want answers to find the nearby group of the Mujahideen. Now, by the way, the Mujahideen was not really all that well organized as a reality. I did some research after watching this movie. They still exist today, and they exist across the entirety of Muslim areas in various countries. In the Soviet-Afghan War, it was several groups that very rarely communicated with one another. So these are literally it's the very definition of what people who support having assault rifles as part of the Second Amendment would say, well, what if an invading army came down our street? We have to protect ourselves. It's just like saying, well, the Beech Grove militia is just as good as the Greenwood militia, but they're separated and they have different leadership and they don't talk to each other. They're just fighting the same enemy. It's a very similar type of thing like that. And so they are just looking for the group or the cell that is in this area. And so they're wiping out this town because they feel like they have harbored them or that their loved ones are there. A lot of family and stuff and fiancés and wives and stuff like that. And then comes the part that I couldn't watch. So, Jason, you can go ahead and take it from here, or Chuck.
Well, the guy they find it's the Khan, I think, of the
Khan, yeah, the guy who runs the town
of the village of the town, yeah. They take him and they want to know what he knows, and he's speaking in it's Pashto. That's I probably butchered the pronunciation, but Pashto is the language, which is the second most prevalent language in Afghanistan after Farsi.
Yeah.
But this movie focuses on the Pashtuwali people and their code. That's very important. And it's not the most populous people in Afghanistan, but it's one of them, and it lends itself again, Jeff, to what you're saying, that there are lots of different cultures within Afghanistan, and they examine some of that in this movie where they are fighting against a common enemy in the Russians, but they also have their own ancient blood feuds that they also contend with, that they set aside for the more immediate threat.
It's more of a alignment by political by the political scale. Are you?
Well, it's usually
are you communist or anti-communist?
It's usually an imperialistic force that creates this. I mean, it was very much the Turks, right? In the early 20th century, like Lawrence of Arabia and all that. But anyway, so yes, what happens? They have captured the call. The call actually had his rifle pointed at Jason Patric's character and fired, but it was empty. And the call laughs, almost like he knew it was empty, but he still wanted to scare the Russian. And they also blew up one of the Russian tanks. Did you mention that? So they're down to one tank.
Right.
So the tank commander
There were some that this group does have some things like grenades,
Yeah.
basic explosives and fire weapons and stuff like that.
They
Not
have the
quite
most
like
ineffective grenades in the world.
well,
They're very ineffective in this.
They also don't have the the quite as good of fire or of flamethrowers that the Russians have, because just a little bit from that one flamethrower completely and totally cooked everybody in that one house. I know that.
Right. Yeah, so they have limited weapons, and the weapons they have, they don't understand.
Right.
How
it was
they
almost
work.
like it was probably dumped off by, the Americans.
A crate was dropped off somewhere.
Yeah, and it's like, here you go. Here's a gun. Hope you know what to do if it jams.
But yeah, the part that nobody wants to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Jason Patrick, Constantine is his character's name, is theoretically saved by one of the members on his team. And the commander, whose name I can't remember now, basically Daskell, Tank Boy, Daskell, wants Constantine to basically martyr this guy, like put him under the tank tread and just roll over him because he won't give up where everyone else is. And Constantine is obviously, well, I say obviously, you'd have to watch the movie to know it's obvious. He doesn't want to do it, right? He's very against this part of the war. He has an internal struggle with it.
Well, it should also be pointed out that Constantine is also a philosopher.
Yeah.
Which is very, very important, because he does struggle with a lot of the philosophical purpose or reason behind doing a thing.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And he eventually does it. He does roll over the Khan of the city because he doesn't have a choice. He feels he does not have a choice. That's brought up later in the movie, but it's really gruesome. The way they show his feet bend back, and
God, I can't do it.
It looks fucking real.
Yeah.
And I think all of us at this point were like, can I survive this film?
Yeah.
Like, that's the moment for me. I was like, oh, I don't know about this.
But here's what, I had commented that this was one hell of a beginning at this point, because we see the brutality against people who are not combatants, non-combatant brutality. So you can understand the Afghan struggle, because you have to assume that this is happening to every town the Russians come across. But then also, you immediately see that Tank Boy, and there's a story why he's called Tank Boy specifically. You can see that he is essentially soulless. He is completely and totally he's been in war his entire life. And he's not very human. He's not very understanding. We understand that that Jason Patrick has severe reservations about everything. And then we also have the two younger tank guys, Stephen Baldwin, who is Anatoly Golikov, and Donald Patrick Harvey, who plays Kaminsky. You really get the impression that one guy is kind of like your college bro sort of guy, like who's always kind of joking around and everything. Whereas Stephen Baldwin is essentially a child. He acts very childish. You're on mute, Jason. Mongo.
Yeah, it's like it's his first tour, right?
Yeah.
He's the greenie. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they also have Samad with them.
Yes. Now Samad is their party. He is friendly to the Communist Party. I don't know exactly what it was exactly called, but it was the party in power in Afghanistan at the time that was friendly with the Russian communists.
Right.
And so he is, he's wearing a soldier's uniform essentially, and he is kind of acting as a guide and translator. But almost immediately, you realize the tank boy doesn't trust him. He's other than his guys, and he's a little. I don't want to say racist, and I don't want to say xenophobic because they're the xenos in this, in this situation. But he's very untrusting because, much like a lot of, and we see this a lot in Vietnam movies, you can't always trust, or there's always been that character who cannot trust the local who's even helping them.
When it gets right down to it, he's paranoid.
Mm-hmm.
He's become less than human. He's lost his humanity, like you said, and or something along those lines you said. And he, if the first person he's going to be, the first person that's going to be the target of that paranoia is going to be the person that doesn't look like him, that looks like the enemy, right? Right. And that's what's happening here. And you get a very good sense that Samad also doesn't trust. I'm just going to call, George. George is a Zunza, right? Is that how you say his name?
Zunza? Yeah, I guess so.
Zunza. He's been in a shit ton of stuff. And he's almost unrecognizable in this movie.
I think this is like our fourth movie
his best
that we
performance.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he doesn't really trust Zunza, or the Beast either, Tank Boy, because he's giving like the soft translations, right?
Yeah.
Of the things that people are saying, because he doesn't want to escalate the situation.
Oh yeah.
Also, he doesn't
constantly trying to de-escalate, and he also, like he says later, he loves Afghanistan. He loves these people. He doesn't want to bring what he sees as the good of communism to these people in a violent way, right? Because he knows that will be counterproductive.
Well, that's
not the way Tank Boy sees it. Tank Boy sees it as an inferior population that needs to be crushed.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that comes from probably Soviet mindset. This is essentially a Vietnam movie just told in a different setting with two different combatants.
Absolutely. 100%.
Because I think you see, like if you think of things that is contemporary to this movie, something like Full Metal Jacket, you get that impression also that there are some of those people that we follow who look at the Vietnamese as savages, basically, that need to be crushed and brought under heel. And that's, and unfortunately, the most powerful countries tend to roll over the least powerful countries almost every day. It's just an unfortunate fact of this world for the better part of the last 100 years. But yeah, so at this point, they've basically not gotten anything, so they're going to leave town, which now allows for
they're called back to the main
front
wherever that
or whatever.
Yeah, wherever that is. Yeah.
This also All Quiet on the All Quiet on the Western Front?
Yeah.
That is also a movie and a book that is non-American too. It's Russian perspective from the First World War. So anyway, so these types of movies do exist. Those are the only two that I can think of. But anyway, so they get called back, except for they make a wrong turn. There's a fork, and you hear Tank Boy say, "No, you go right, you go right, you go right," and they're now lost.
Right.
And this is now essentially the rest of the movie. You have the tank lost, trying to figure out where they're, where they're supposed to be, while also being chased by the Afghans, who now, because this, I don't remember exactly where they got it, but they have an RPG, and it is something that is a tank buster, and it is something that they are going to basically track down the Beast at this point, and they're going to get revenge for the slaughter of this town. But meanwhile, also, so you have the tank rolling along while you also have people who know the terrain, who know how to basically trap them if they can keep up with them. But you also have the tank able to get out ahead enough to where they poison a water spot.
Can I back up just a little? Because there's some important points here that I want to make sure we covered. Hopefully we didn't and I missed it. The Taj, or the Khan of the town, now is Taj.
Right.
Because his brother was the original Khan.
Right. It's a very familial passing off or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Constantine killed Taj's brother.
Yes.
And this is brought up very soon in a conversation between Samad and Constantine in a way that they don't really know that Constantine has killed his brother, but it's very important to the story. But yeah, they poison the water up ahead, and go ahead, Jeff. I just wanted to bring that.
Yeah, the problem is that I think it was either Kaminsky or Stephen Baldwin who was supposed to hide the canister of this stuff that they poisoned the water of, but they didn't, so they couldn't kill off everybody who's chasing them. They only kill one guy. And by the way,
Taj realizes the canister is there,
right? And so
stops everyone else from drinking,
right? And the guy, and while he's stopping everybody else from drinking, the guy is like choking on the poison. I want to say when they return to that a couple of days later, you do see the guy, and something you don't often see in movies. The guy is bloated from being dead, and something you just don't see too much in movies, and I appreciated that.
You also don't see too many Cuban Americans playing Pashtuns. Stephen Bauer.
There's quite
Cuban American.
There's quite a bit
It just cracks me up. Like the leap of suspension of disbelief you have to take in the casting in this movie
and the language the Russians speak American. It's so weird.
They don't even have a British accent.
Right.
I mean when you have Jason Patric and Stephen Baldwin and also what's his name, Donald Patrick Harvey playing Russians, it's just weird. It's
right.
It's weird. It's the hardest thing for me to get by.
Zunza is the closest because I assume by his last name he's Polish, right? So he's got a little bit of the look, at least.
Yeah. But so they, so basically, in the meantime, also, the women from the town or village or whatever have also followed. But there have been, there are a few moments or there are a few instances in which the beast gets out ahead and they have to stop for, the night or for whatever, which allows for the Afghans to catch up, which then allow for the women who are also following. And it is, it's a chase movie, really.
Yeah, it's cat and mouse, and it's not always, you're not always certain who the cat is and who the mouse is. It changes from scene to scene based on who kind of has the position of strength. But the important note is that the Afghani people, they know that the tank is going into essentially a dead end.
Yeah.
So
they're in a valley,
so they know,
which is amazing because it looks like they're on top. It makes it look like they're on the surface. They're actually in a valley, and that's amazing when you think about that kind of terrain. That in a desert you may see for miles and miles and miles flat land until all of a sudden, oops, there's a crevasse. Oh, also, oops, we're in the valley too. So it's like there's
So that's important to their decision to pursue because they know the terrain. They know that they will have an opportunity to corner the tank and blow it up with the RPG, hopefully.
And as they only have so many bazookas, bazooka missiles for the RPG, they are getting better with each shot that they take. Which is another thing, because there's a little bit of a ticking clock to that too, because eventually they're going to get good enough to hit the tank. But at the same time, Commander Tank Boy, he thinks, he tells a story at some point where it's like, that I brought back a tank without the turret that took a direct hit from an RPG we lost some people, which does not make Stephen Baldwin or Donald Patrick Harvey very comfortable. But he's like, yeah, we lost some people, but I was able to drive that tank back. Nothing can stop this tank, basically, which is partially true. It's just that everybody inside may bake and die, but that's okay. So at one point they stop for the night, and they figure we were probably far enough ahead. Plus, it's pitch black in the desert, so it's like we can probably stop. We can bunk down for the night. This is when we find out a little bit more from Samad about the culture of the Afghanis. And so then we also find out that that Kaminsky, Donald Patrick Harvey, in order to stay frosty, because he's the gunner, he drinks the brake fluid.
Yeah.
From the tank, which is
says he filters it through bread first,
and then he puts raisins and nuts or something in it
to ferment. Yeah.
That's
That's not great.
We also had the misfire before we get here, which is a cool scene.
Oh yeah, there's So, which only exacerbates the issue.
The dissension between Samad and Tank
Boy, because Samad was asked for a shell, he grabs one. Everybody saw him just grab one randomly. It misfires, which then they have to abandon the tank because there is a possibility that the tank can explode from a misfire, which seems like a tank is only a matter of time before you die in a box on wheels.
Well, yeah. What's his name said 1 in 100 are misfires. It's like, holy shit. Yeah.
It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. That's way better odds than getting a blood clot from the J&J vaccine.
Holy moly.
No shit. Yeah. It is many, many magnitudes more likely.
There's also another moment before this discussion between Samad and Constantine that introduces an idea that's present throughout the rest of the film, is that the Afghanis run into a holy man who's running around a fire. He's talking about David and Goliath or something, and then he said, "My fire will light your way. The fire of Allah will show you the way." And it introduces that. I mean, maybe it was slightly mentioned before, but Allah will provide for the Afghanis what they need. And what it provides at this point are the tank tracks.
Yep.
To follow.
Yeah, because they basically look up and it's like, oh yeah, there's the tank. Yeah, you can just follow those.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And then we have mention in that conversation between Samad and Constantine of the idea of Nanawate, which is the name of the play, I believe.
Yes.
That this was based on. There's like 3 principles. That's one of them.
Yeah. The 3 principles are hospitality, revenge, and sanctuary. Revenge is balad. Sanctuary is Nanawate. I can't remember the Pashto word for hospitality, but those are the 3 main tenets of their people. Yeah.
Yep. And Constantine says something interesting here, because he says, "What if I murdered your brother and then asked for Nanawate?" He's like, "We'd have to give it to you," which we know at this point he's already murdered Taj, the Khan's brother. Right. And this is like a point in this movie where I think Jason and I have talked about this before. I get so spent on movies that tip their hands this much that I'm like, I don't know if I can. I already know what the hell is going to happen. But this movie, even though I don't like war movies and I don't like movies that tip their hands, I was like, I got to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
So it's been effective up to this point, to the point where even though I felt that I knew where it was going, I still wanted to finish it.
Well, and you're also, I mean, and here's the benefit that this movie is. This is the benefit of the doubt that this movie earns too, and it is that Constantine is a wholly different person than the rest of his group, of his brigade. right? So he's, you can see that he actually cares to learn about the culture, to which, yes, that's going to play into it, but it also came up somewhat naturally when he's just curious about the culture and like Samad too.
Yeah. And that's key to his character, and it's key to your it's key to kind of understanding, okay, this is the guy we want as an audience to get behind. He is he's not a maniac. He's made some poor choices under duress, but he's someone who is truly willing to understand who the enemy is and understand the bigger picture and question authority, which is really important.
Well, yeah, I mean, Samad gives him that idea, I think, too, because earlier he says, I didn't have a choice.
Right.
And I think a lot of this we're going to talk about later. The Beast of War is choice in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like Constantine had to kill the Khan. Or at least he felt he had to kill the Khan.
Well, and then there's a couple of things. Either he had to kill them, or he would die and the Khan would be dead anyway. By the next person. Because he'd get a demerit, and when he went home, he'd be in, jail for the rest of his life. Because these are the Soviets, right? Yeah.
I don't, he'd have a lot of problems when he went home.
He would have a pretty cold retirement. Yeah.
Yeah, but Samad, as we said, says you do have a choice, and that kind of plays out the rest of this movie too.
Yeah.
So a lot of what this movie is about happens in that conversation with Samad and Constantine.
And it's pretty much halfway in the movie too.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Jason.
And yeah, I just want to hammer home the concept of Nanawate, and that it is a religious tenet, right? It is something that is sacred, and that they even, as a people, when confronted with this the choice to whether or not to honor the Nanawate, even fight about how far it should extend. So it's really interesting the concept, how it is discussed within the group that holds it as a dear tenet. I also want to mention that Nanawate is most likely the prevalent reason why Osama bin Laden was so hard to track down, is because he was most likely requesting it from all of these people across the land, knowing that they couldn't refuse him, even at their own risk of harm or death. Yeah,
that's a good connection there, buddy.
Yeah,
I won't refute you on that one.
Which also, I mean, Osama bin Laden does have a big connection to this war too. So
absolutely.
So I mean, and our connection to him is all taken in this. It's all part of this recipe here. So this, Jason, do you want to talk about your favorite scene of this movie? Your favorite 2 seconds?
Oh my God. It is so funny. It was like this moment of levity, unintentional levity that I needed, I think. So, the tank has camped for the night, and meanwhile the Afghanis have crept up and caught up, and they stage a surprise attack, and they throw grenades down into the camp, and one of the grenades lands, and Stephen Baldwin's character sees their grenade and yells, "Grenade!" in the most high-pitched, effeminate way, and it kills me. It is literally like Stephen Baldwin is so young in this movie that his voice hasn't properly changed yet, and he's like in the throes of puberty. It's so fucking funny, and it's so funny because he even says it again twice. Another grenade comes down and he screams it again, and it's not quite as funny the second time because his face is kind of blurred, but the first time he's like it's very expressive. And he turns away to grab cover, and I had to take video of it and send it to Jeff and Chuck because I just was dying laughing. I watched it about 12 times.
Well, the good news is it's still on Prime, so you can keep watching that scene.
Yes.
So they have to beat cheeks and they all pile into the tank and they drive off. So they get out, they drive for a little bit and they eventually end up in the middle of nowhere. No cliff face, nothing. It's flat desert and it's pitch dark and they're in the tank and they decide to stay in the tank. And is it at this point that they mentioned that that there are some mechanical issues with the tank that have started to come up? The hail fire of the hailstorm or hailstorm, goddamn hellfire. I completely totally switched those, and that's amazing. The hailstorm of grenades that Stephen Baldwin went through puberty with. Has damaged some of the undercarriage of the tank. In particular, oil. There's a leak in the fuel line too, I think. And
we also know they're low on brake fluid because
the one dude is drinking brake fluid.
Man.
And then also, it's also damaged the coolant. So they're going to overheat if they keep going too far too long. So they, but meanwhile, Tank Boy is like, we got everything we need inside this tank. And I think this is when he mentions that, because I think at this point, Constantine's like, they're getting better with the RPG. And Tank Boy is like, yeah, well, it might blow off the turret, it might blow off the top, and we might lose some of you, but I'll still be able to drive the tank home. And then that's when you see like Kaminsky and Stephen Baldwin kind of look at each other like, "Fuck, we're fucking."
They're having slight doubt at this point.
Yeah.
Constantine is having kind of major doubts, and it's about to get worse because they set up some equipment around the tank to register movement.
Yep.
Right, and Constantine sees a lot of movement. He's like, "We are surrounded," and one of the
about
coolest
25
scenes,
targets.
Yeah, about 25 targets. And one of the coolest scenes, I think, in this movie of the beast itself is when they do the 360 turret, like flame throwing,
they're shooting
like
everything.
15 feet. Yeah, everything they can. And they totally wipe out this threat, which we'll find out what it is in a minute. And Tank Boy's doubts have also grown larger about Samad. So he's like, go check out what's going on out there.
Yeah, hey, Samad, why don't you get out there and check it out?
Yeah.
And he's like,
that scene reminded me of the remote sentry turret scene in the deleted scene from the director's cut of Aliens. I just throw that out there.
Oh, I haven't seen that. I'll have to check that out.
Where like all there they have the sensors set up in the perimeter and they're all like swarming and they fire all their weapons and they're still coming. Yeah.
They deleted that? That's ridiculous.
You never, I mean, and to be honest with you, this is the first time I really thought about the fact that, because I am one who thinks tanks are really good only up to a certain point, because it's like they're not exactly fast. They're not fast like a jet or a Jeep, right? They're not steady, so they can't. Some terrain you can't take with a tank. You can take a lot, but maybe not all terrains. And it's like they have that turret, which they shoot really powerful shit, but they're not good up close. But then again, it's like, yeah, this tank also has a flamethrower and also has a gun or a machine gun at the top. So like this is fully decked and also you don't often see tank turrets spin all the way around in action.
Right. Yeah.
Normally it's very forward facing and always forward facing, but yeah, this you get to see the full movement of how much a tank could fuck up something.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird though because they moved that tank head really fast in this scene. But later, when they're trying to crank it, it's like super slow.
Well, later they've lost power.
They lost power to the
doing
auto.
it manual.
Oh, they're doing it manually. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
because also I think they're having battery issues in the tank too.
Yeah.
So this tank is
sense.
in not good shape. But at this point, they haven't lost that yet. Yeah.
So Samad is out there, and I think I can't remember which character is on the gun. but Tank Boy tells him to stand down, sends Constantine up there and says, take out Samad. And they have this argument, and that this is where we get the full breadth of the idea that if Constantine doesn't follow orders, he's fucking screwed when he gets back to Soviet Russia. But he says no. And he gets
at one
down,
point,
and this is
just a little bit before this, before the grenade ball drop, Constantine's been taking notes about everything, and he's got some pretty damaging shit about Tank Boy. That Tank Boy already knows that Constantine is planning to potentially report him for some stuff. So he's
and at the very
testing
least,
him back, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of comes to a head in the next scene after this. But Constantine says no. Samad comes back. We find out they torched a whole shit ton of deer.
Yep.
It wasn't the enemy. It was just deer. And it leads to kind of a cool scene next when the Mujahideen, I'm just not going to say that anymore. Yeah, I'm not going to say it anymore. Show up and they're like, these people are indiscriminate. They just kill everything.
Yeah.
And it's kind of accurate, but it's also learned from a false premise. They didn't just kill everything. They thought they were being attacked, but still,
paranoia strikes deep, right? And also it is.
Well, they haven't seen anything to make them disbelieve that they would do that either.
Absolutely,
exactly.
Absolutely.
So they've also, and also it also sets aside the consideration of, because it plays out big time the next morning, but it's the idea that the Afghani people have this religious tenet that they live by that gives them not just their morals but their ethics as well, right? Meanwhile, you have the Soviet Russians who have the communist Soviet regime had essentially shed all that the idea of religion and morality, and
their tenets are on their ideals, like what they ideally want things to be. Yeah,
exactly. And so it really shows in Tank Boy, because he is essentially hardened by Soviet doctrine.
All he's known is war.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. And while you could say what he originally was doing as an 8-year-old child when he was lowered down to blow up to blow up German tanks, while you could say that is while it's fucked up that it's an 8-year-old kid doing it, there is a certain amount of what's the word I'm looking for? There is a certain amount of understanding that he is doing something in favor of his homeland.
Right.
Well, it's the
but not able to see it the other way. Yeah. But he can't see it from the Afghani side. So it's like, to him, they are just, again, another thing that needs to be crushed, but they're doing to him what he was doing to the Nazis.
Well, I think that Tank Boy is what Constantine would become had he never exercised his right of choice. Yeah. Because Constantine, throughout his whole entire life, has been operating in, and you have to assume when he's an 8-year-old boy, he has scruples about this. But after doing things so many times where you feel you don't have a choice, you start to believe in the choice that you're making.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened to Constantine Tank Boy, and what could happen to Constantine if he doesn't say, no, this is a line I'm not willing to cross.
It reminds me of another submarine movie, Crimson Tide. You guys have seen that movie?
I remember that movie.
Oh, yeah.
And George Zunda was in that too, funny enough. But the Zunza character, the Tank Boy in that, was Gene Hackman. He was the captain of the submarine. And a lot of the same sort of moral principles and choices come to head in that. And Hackman's character is very much like the hot-headed commander, right, who can't stand to be questioned by his second in command, who was Denzel Washington in that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Also, if you want to take it to another submarine movie, Hunt for Red October doesn't necessarily have the can't stand to be questioned. It is the honorable.
Yeah.
I am doing the honorable thing when nobody else will.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And that's Sean Connery.
Yeah.
Hey, how about that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
kind of
Alec
Italian
Baldwin.
Russian. And Alec Baldwin, yeah.
Yeah. But Alec Baldwin had fully gone through puberty by that.
Yes, he had.
Yeah, those are two good movies.
They are good
Maybe
movies.
we should
I
do
like
a
submarine
movie month. Yeah.
I mean, a tank movie is basically, like I said, a submarine movie. It really is.
Yeah.
In many ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a lot during Star Trek too, also.
Yes, we did.
So anyway, the next morning comes and shit really comes to a head at this point because they've kind of moved on a little bit more. They're like plotting their next course, and Samad, it's time for him to pray. So he starts setting out the his blanket, and he's taking off his shoes, he's getting ready to pray. And Tank Boy is like, hey, what the hell are you doing? Stop that, basically. At this point, you can tell Samad is like, he's really angry at this point because it is something that is now interfering with his tenets and what he is to do. And Tank Boy is just messing with him, basically. And he's decided he's had enough of Samad. So they have to figure out if this little pond can handle the tank going through it. So he asks Samad to check to see if the bottom of this pond is mud or if it's basically concrete or rock. Yeah.
Rock, yeah.
And as once he answers that it's indeed rock, Tank Boy just shoots him dead. Mm-hmm. Right there in the water, to which at that point Constantine's like, Constantine's no longer part of this group. He plans immediately. He starts writing everything down, very, very quickly. It's like, I'm going to report you when we get back to the rest of the army, basically. And, this is totally uncalled for. Well, Tank Boy is like, well, I'll show you. Hey, other two guys, tie him up to that rock over there and basically just leave him for the Afghanis. And
trap him.
There's a little bit more nuance before that, but that we don't necessarily need to get into. We're getting into a pretty long episode already, but there is a moment where Tank Boy explains himself to Constantine, essentially. It says, and it's when he talks a lot about his history in Stalingrad and in World War II fighting the Nazis, and he talks about how, he knows how to smell a traitor, even if they don't know they're a traitor yet, essentially is what he's saying. It's a big time paraphrase, but
which is funny because all of his actions are fulfilling that own prophecy of his.
Right. Yeah.
So
and then there's Constantine is still kind of like maybe looking for his chance at this point, and he takes the worst possible chance ever later when he they're questioning whether or not they should just get out on foot and walk or not. Like one of the other soldiers brings it up, and he brings that up to to Tank Boy, and Tank Boy asks him, well, what do you think? All right. And it's sort of this awkward encounter that I don't know why exactly it leads to Constantine grabbing for his pistol, but it does. And that's sort of,
because he said he would be mutinous.
Right.
But it seemed like something he could talk his way out of and get another opportunity later. But instead he puts himself into like a weird position of weakness. It didn't feel like that was the moment, I guess, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's fair. Samad had already been killed then, though, right?
Right, he had, but that had already been like an entire night had passed. Say, well, why didn't he make a move before then? It was just weird. It's a weird kind of impetus for what inevitably has to happen,
right?
Where they leave Constantine behind. They tie him to a rock. They booby trap his body with a grenade, and they leave him to die.
And Golikov doesn't want to do this, but no. he is still operating under the I don't have a choice.
Right.
tenet, right? The ideal.
And Kaminsky just doesn't want to be killed.
Right.
Because he's like, shut up, are you insane? It's like we can't be killed.
Kaminsky is in survival, full on survival.
He has less scruples, but he has more
self-preservation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So at this point, meanwhile, cutting back to the Afghanis, they're still trying to get rid of the women who are following, because it's like, this is not your place. We will track them down. We will, but the women are like, they killed my fiance, or they killed my husband, or whatever, Well, they're the first ones who come, or they're the second ones to come along, Constantine, who've been strung up on this rock in the sun. Some wild dogs come along and start to kind of like bite at him a little bit. And so he just lets the grenade go from behind his head, which blows up one of the dogs.
Yeah, that's like timed perfectly too. That's a pretty good scene.
Yeah,
he's got just enough cover too for the grenade to drop off the rock, so that when it explodes, he's shielded from the blast.
He's shielded on top of the rock. Yeah. But not from all of the blood splatter.
No.
Yeah. So then So then after that, some more time passes, and then the women come along, and they see him, and he's trying to ask for
Nanawate.
And they're like, no. So they just.
Well, I love what she says. She says, "I have another word for you, balad, revenge."
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Something to note here: that woman was the wife to be to the Khan that he killed. Yeah.
Right. And so she starts picking up rocks, and she says something really cool to the other women, like, let your anger turn to stone, or let Allah turn your anger to stone.
Yeah.
And they start fucking whipping rocks at him, and I don't think any of them miss. He's taking a pretty good beating from these rocks.
Yep.
Until the men of the until Taj and the other men show up, and so he starts saying, and I'm sorry, what's
Nanawate.
He starts asking for Nanawate from them, and it's like, and one guy who's like, hey, I want to kill these guys too. He's like, hey, he's just learned that word. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what it is. He doesn't know what he's saying, and we don't have to give it to him.
Right.
So it's the argument that Jason was talking about. He's not an Afghani. We don't have to extend this religious tenet to foreigners, right? But then it's a theological argument discussion that they have.
Right.
It's a quick one, but it's like, are you sure that's the case? Maybe we do.
Right. And as it really kind of lands, though, it's like, really, Taj has the power to say, no, you're not going to kill them. I'm going to grant this. And
it's a little unstable power, but he has it.
Yeah. But he has
and Taj is, I think, one of the more interesting characters in this because of his growth through a very short period of time, emotional and leadership growth. And also he sees an opportunity to, it's like, well, wait a minute, why would they string him up, Constantine? This guy can help us against a common enemy because he's now the enemy of our enemy, right?
Yep.
So he's seen a very pragmatic way to get key strategic help for them to accomplish their goal.
Because theoretically he'd know how to use the RPG.
Right.
I think his brother-in-law.
Well, it's also broken at this point too. It's kaput. The trigger spring is Yeah.
That's one of my favorate scenes when they get to that cave.
Sorry, that's coming up here.
When they're trying to communicate, I really like it a lot.
Yeah. So at this point also, Taj has also gained power through really being intelligent. Whereas Tank Boy is using brawn. He's the commander. He, all of his people who follow him because he is a commander. He is using that as his brawn to kind of force people into following him. Whereas
Taj is earning respect.
Exactly. And he's learning it big time in that cave scene. So if somebody wants to pick that up from here, go for it.
Yeah, so there's still some contention over whether they should kill Constantine or not.
Yep.
But Taj decides let's look to our enemy for insight. So they all offer him food. He chooses his food. They eat together, and then he ends up getting or seeing that the RPG is broken, right? And Taj brings it to him to fix it. He's got his busted up glasses. He can't see. It's pretty funny. And he points at his glasses.
Yeah.
But he asks for one of their other guns, an Enfield, I think it was. He takes the spring out of the Enfield, puts it in the RPG.
So
but
with
while
one
he's
guy
doing
in the background, it's like, well, now he's ruined 2 of our guns.
Yeah, I can't remember. That guy's kind of important. I mean, he's the leader of the actual rebels, right? But he's not the Khan of the city.
Right.
But he's also related to Taj somehow.
He is Taj's cousin.
Their
cousin. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He's Mustafa, right? And they're scavengers, and they have some sort of ancient feud with that village's call.
Yeah. He's the tank boy of the other side, basically, in a lot of ways. But yeah, he's a scavenger, and he yells that out. Now he's ruined 2 of our guns. But then when he fixes it, he goes and hands it to Mustafa, and there's kind of like a cool little moment. He's still not sure about him, but he's like, "Oh, you fixed the gun. That's pretty neat."
Yeah.
And I think from there, we see a little bit of, the group kind of, I hate to say warming up, but maybe a little more trust of Constantine coming from that group in the cave.
Yeah, they start to kind of really cement that idea that we do have a common enemy, we can use one another, while still offering enough respect to where we're not going to kill each other, but we're going to use each other.
Yeah. And Mustafa also is like, well, we can kill him at any time. Right?
Yeah. Yes. But Taj and Constantine start to develop some kind of communication with the kaput, and just kind of pointing at things to learn the language, I guess, in a little bit. And that comes in big here in the future, because I think the next scene is when the tank is like, we found the road, we're getting the hell out of here, we've made it, and then they realize they're am I getting ahead?
No,
well, they're a little bit ahead. They think they see the road. You're right.
Yes, and they end up at a canyon.
But they're still in a valley. That just blows my fucking mind.
Yeah, they're between it. They're in a valley, but there's also another another valley, right, that they would fall into.
Because the helicopter comes.
Yeah.
Yep.
At this point, and they're going, hey, we're going to refuel you, and we'll take you back. And Tank Boy's like, the hell you are? I'm driving my tank back. And the other two guys are like, why don't we use a fucking helicopter?
The whole reason for that is because they said, we'll call in a strike, because they don't want to leave the tank for the enemy to have.
Right.
But he's like, nobody's blowing up my fucking tank. We are taking it.
Yes, exactly. And at this point, like, also Stephen Baldwin and Donald Patrick Harvey are like, they feel trapped now because they want to leave. And yet, basically, if they do leave with the helicopter, they're going to technically be mutinous based on what Tank Boy believes. And yet, like, they don't also want to leave their commander alone in the middle of this, as they call it. It's like you're in a cul-de-sac, essentially, meaning the only way out is to go all the way back from whence they came. So they they basically take some fuel, and they say, okay, meet us at the pass, basically, as we get all the way back through, and give us some more fuel. The helicopter guy's like, yeah, sure. And he takes off. And so the tank goes back the other direction. And at this point, it's to go back in the direction that they do, they're going to have to get themselves into some tight spaces, which gives the Mujahideen and Constantine their opportunity to basically
there's only one way out. It's the pass, and there's only one way out, and they can get to where they're going to be by cutting across the mountains, because they know as they communicate, there's a shortcut essentially, and they can get the element of surprise and set a trap. Yeah.
And what's the helicopter out doing? They were out looking for water.
Yeah.
And they end up finding
the poison well.
The poison well, and they all die.
Yep.
Not taking into account the warning of the dead guy that's already laying there with no bullet wounds or anything.
Right. Yeah.
Like, oh, well, he must have just died of heat stroke. It's pretty hot here, right?
Yeah.
I guess so.
I'm sure this water's fine.
Yeah. But then when they get back to that, I think it's Stephen Baldwin who's like, do you think they went ahead and radioed for more fuel?
He's like, of course they did. Of course they did.
Of course they did. Because Tank Boy says, of course they did.
Yeah.
Because he is thinking, of course they did, because that's what the Soviets would do. We are going, it's like it's living and dying by that code that is based on the idealism, not the realism or the ethics or the morals.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're at that lake, the somebody else say it for me. Thank you, Mujahideen.
You're gonna do the Joe Bob thing and hold up.
I'll hold up some cards for you.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, they're running towards the tank, and Tank Boy is looking through the tank binoculars, and he's like, "That son of a bitch," because he sees Constantine running with him. And they're like, well, we need to get the hell out of here. Or I'll fire some shots, and then we need to get the hell out of here. This is when the tank completely depowers itself, basically.
And it's overheated, too.
It's overheated. They can't go to backup battery power. And eventually there's some firing and, some excitement and stuff. But eventually they get the tank moving again, and they roll out of the area. And Mustafa at this point is like, hey, we got a helicopter, so we don't even care about that tank anymore. We got what we came for, because he's a scavenger.
Right.
But the Taj and Jason, or Constantine specifically, is like, we need to go now. We need to get them now. They're dying. They're kaput because there's fluid on the ground.
And it's also he's also the driver, so he understands that where the tank is also deficient. And where as the driver, you think, wow, this guy's going to really pretty much know what the tank can and can't do. But also, Taj and Constantine are both kind of trying to tell the scavengers, like, hey man, think of the bigger picture here. Who cares about that? We don't even know how to fly that. Don't worry about that. We got to go blow up the thing that can go blow up the next town, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So they do end up running the tank down. There's a death, like an explosion with a rocket shot and stuff like that. But they end up at the end of the pass. And it's Taj on one side, Constantine on the other, and the tank coming through.
And an awesome score going on at this
point. Yes.
The music is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is that Taj has brought the last RPG over to the other side.
Right.
So
the gun and the bullet is separated.
Yes. And he's like, I have my shot, but I don't have the RPG. Will you just throw it to me? Are they called missiles on that, or RPGs? I guess it doesn't really matter.
It's a rocket, kind of.
Yeah.
But he throws the rocket over to him. And they eventually, after some skirmishing and running around, get a shot on the tank. But what do they hit? The gun.
Only the turret.
The end of the gun. Yeah, they hit the end of the turret.
And it looks like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, like if you plugged up...
yes, it does. The shotgun that blows up. Yeah. But, so they kind of fail there, right? And again, we've had this idea of David and Goliath going through this. The tank is getting
up. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's an explosion, and I'm like, how the hell did that happen? But the rocks from the explosion fall down on the tank. One of the characters even says, I think it's the Holy Man, the rock took down Goliath. And then we see that the women are up there, and they had either a grenade or something had
They had
caused
a
an
belt of
explosion.
grenades that they had taken from a soldier, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they blew up the rock, and it came down on the tank. So then we have the fluid leaking. Constantine knows about it. He throws a Molotov, a kind of makeshift Molotov, to kind of burn them out of the tank, right?
And this is pretty rough in this, because he's hearing his old friends basically screaming, scared that they're going to be baked alive.
Right. And I think he specifically calls out Golikov because he knows probably that he would have saved him had he had the choice, right?
Yeah.
Felt he had the choice to do so. I'm accidentally looking at a RPG Wikipedia instead of the Beast Wikipedia. But so they do, after, Tank Boy offering some idea of like, we're safe in here, we'll just stay in here. Eventually they get out.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I believe Taj decided, it's like, yeah, well, basically send them on their way.
Yep. The Taj, like, if they can get out of here on foot, we'll let them go.
Yeah.
We've won. We
won,
took out.
We don't have to kill
beast.
them. Yeah, we don't have to kill them. Showing the difference also in the style, whereas the Soviets began the movie feeling like they had to kill everybody in that town. Now the other side of it is, yeah, we won. We don't have to beat them. And we've got all the guns too, by the way.
Yeah.
Constantine tells Tank Boy, I want you to live to see them win.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This isn't Stalingrad. I want you to live to see them win.
Yep.
And Taj also says something interesting to Constantine. He asks if he's an angel or a devil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When he begs basically for mercy for Tank Boy. Yeah.
Yep. He's like, are you an angel or a devil? And super interesting with the ideas of, Allah, and Constantine's character is like, he's in restraints almost. The choices he's making now are for survival, but so you don't really know if he, up until this point, if what he's doing is to live or from the good of his heart. You can only assume it is. But then what happened next kind of cements this idea, right? A helicopter shows up. Well, two things happen next. The women run after Tank Boy and
the other two. Which I don't think nobody else saw them do, because they're still up on top of the cliff. Yeah.
No, they didn't see it.
And Tank Boy gets to that turn where they made the wrong turn earlier in the movie.
Yeah, and he stops, realizing everything that's happened because of this.
Yes, because of this right here. And he ends up getting basically mutilated by the women. We don't see it, but all that comes back are bloody boots, right?
Yeah. Boots and his jacket.
Some other bloody, his jacket, thank you.
The other two were able to run away, but they really weren't, They
were spared. We don't know if they survived, though. We know nothing about them past this point. Yeah. But then a helicopter shows up, and presumably one that was called in by the other helicopter. I would assume they did call in. And this is interesting. This is really interesting here, because Constantine has the choice to go with the
Mujahideen.
Thank you. But if he does that, they're likely all going to die, right? If he takes up arms with that group, they're all going to die. So while it feels like he's deserting them, in reality, he's saving their lives.
He's also pretty horrified to see them do what his own people were doing.
Exactly.
Except for, even though it was the women acting on their own, you could say the same thing. Tank Boy was acting on his own.
Exactly right. He chooses the enemy he knows.
Yeah. But he also saves the lives of the other enemy, because if he was under fire, putting fire on the helicopter, it would have wiped them all out. Yeah. But instead, they just leave with him, which saves these other fighters.
Which is interesting, because more than likely in a week's time, after he gets rehydrated and spend some time in the field hospital, he's going to be right back out driving another tank, blowing up another town.
The beast of war goes on,
Yep.
right? I mean, these characters have lived this little story, but the beast of war goes on. It never ends. It just discards people and throws them back in and rips them up. One thing I did find interesting, and I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but the way he was airlifted out, he looked like an angel.
Yeah.
You know, it was almost answering the question that Taj answered. But go ahead, Jeff.
Well, it could go either way. I mean, still angels and demons both have wings. You know,
that's a good point. I read it the one way because, in my opinion, he was saving them by leaving.
Oh,
if you read it the other way,
you could read it. You could read it both ways. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess it depends. I guess it depends on the perspective that you have. If you're the Taj on the ground looking up at that, you might see that as being an angel. But if you think about it, the Russians are putting somebody in there who has started to think for himself, who maybe doesn't have any respect for any authority anymore, into their into the midst, and how they're going to.
And you wonder if the Khan had that.
Yeah. No,
sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you wonder if the Khan had that kind of realization, because when he was about to leave, Mustafa was going to kill Constantine.
Yeah.
And Khan stops him from shooting on him. And I think it's more to spare him than to spare themselves, because obviously if they shoot there, they're in another battle.
Yeah.
But I think he's making the conscious choice to send humanity back to the Russians, right? This guy has some humanity to him. He's not he's not a cog in the machine anymore. Even if he ends up back out there, he'll make better choices or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. No,
reading too much into it.
No, I mean, I think that it's, this is a movie that has two perspectives, right? Like it's entirely, it's kind of a, what side do you want? And it may be worth watching the movie just from a different perspective at another time. You know, it's like, because the movie does ultimately fork off at the same point that the tank hits the fork in the road, right? It's like, you look at the Soviets and Constantine in particular as the protagonist, or you look at it as Constantine's a hostage within the antagonists. And you could probably really, really deeply study the movie from both perspectives.
Yeah.
I think regardless, it's a happy ending, because I think what you have are two enemies who have gained a lot of perspective about one another, right? Yeah. And I think there's some hope. I wish the last 23 years since this movie came out went better. But I still find some hope in the message of the film.
Yeah. No, I mean, there is a little bit of hope. There's but there's also that, I mean, unfortunately, I didn't exactly look at that the exact way when I was watching. I was just thinking, it's like, Constantine's just going to get spit back out into another tank and is going to have to make these choices all over again.
He is, but maybe he'll make better choices, right?
Maybe the next tank commander kills him too.
Maybe he is the next tank commander.
It could be, but you can't. Yeah, that's definitely a possibility, but it's a defeatist one, right?
Right.
The hopeful answer is that there are more people like Constantine, and that the more of them that are in this army, the better, because they're going to make more ethical choices, and they're going to maybe change hearts and minds. It didn't happen, but history told us it didn't happen. But
right.
But you can hope that maybe one day there is some hope for humanity.
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of the attitude that was given in Slaughterhouse 5 Slaughterhouse 5, where, the children's war. There are people out there. These are people. They're being guided by, in one case, a force that they can't question, which is the Russian government, and in another case, a force they can't question, which is religion.
Right.
And the struggle of those people on a daily basis out there. Some of them give in, like Mustafa and Tank Boy, to the beast of war. Yet others are like, no, we need to maintain humanity, right? Yeah. And I agree with you, Jason. Over the last, I think it's 33 years, right? It was 88.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah, 33 years. Yep.
That there would be more change. And I think there is. I'm hopeful that I think there are more people now than there were then that are less fearful, less xenophobic. They're still here. We see it every day. But the numbers are starting to show maybe a growth in a more worldly community than a
I think I think that person to person, interpersonal relationships with taking culture, taking physical differences into account, all of that has grown. But two, the bad guys are getting louder for at least for a little while. And this is like one of those things where it's like they're going to get louder until they're gone. It'll
get worse before it gets better.
Right. I think on the topic of xenophobia.
And then number three, I do agree with you, Chuck. There are more people in the world.
Yeah.
On the topic of xenophobia, I think it's become a discussion. It's become political. It's become a conversation, for better or worse. Sometimes that conversation is really, really ugly, but it is definitely like it's an issue that people discuss now, and it's trying to find empathy. There are those who would see us isolate ourselves. There's those who are trying to seek empathy and understanding, and people who aren't like us, who are living in more unfortunate situations. So I think that the ugliness is still there, but it's something that people are talking about more. If that makes any sense, it's not hidden behind a wall of nationalistic propaganda anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is what the 80s very much was.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
1000%. Good. This was it held my attention the entire time. I enjoyed trying to pick it apart while I was watching it. That first 10 minutes had me questioning it, as I think we all said, but I really enjoyed it. I think this is something I would watch again for sure.
I think that there's a really good gut check at the beginning there too, right? It's like this is the reality of war. This isn't Red Dawn. Chuck, you brought up Red Dawn earlier. It's like this isn't bad guy shows up and good guys come and they all get to, and some of them may die, but they're always going to win. In the first few minutes of this movie, you have to question if anybody's going to win. And ultimately, nobody really does.
I agree. I think I said that early. Nobody wins. Right?
Nobody wins. But at the same time, though, it's not a dour nobody wins, right? It's like this is just the reality. Take the good from some of these stories out of it. Yeah. Anyway, no. Yes, this movie, like I said, was really super engaging. I'm not a huge war movie person. Though, as Jason and I talked about earlier, there are movies like Saving Private Ryan that are very easy to watch again. But over the last 20 years, I've changed, and it's hard to think about war without thinking about the real life, the real life side of it. And we're not playing G.I. Joe anymore in the backyard where there's real life consequences to war. And that's, but at the same time, I'm really, really glad I saw this movie. And Nick, if you're listening, hopefully you've stuck around for this whole 2 hours almost. Hell of a suggestion. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. It was a great suggestion. And hopefully we can do our part in spreading the recommendation to others, and that others may watch this movie as well and learn. So I do think it's an important message. Sort of sadly, it's kind of like a message that has to be ingrained in us over and over again. Of, we're all human, right?
Right.
And it's sad state of affairs that has to be fed back to us, but it does.
Yep.
We get we get siloed into our own worlds, our own beliefs, and aren't able to see the bigger picture sometimes. And movies like this allow us to.
Exactly right. I think we did it, guys.
We done did it.
It's a good movie. It's a very good movie. And it's available to rent pretty much every place where you can watch digital movies like YouTube and so forth. But if you have Amazon Prime, it is something you can watch just part of Prime. At least as of the time this was recording, although I assume if it's no longer part of Prime, you can still probably rent it. So, So Wednesdays, you're listening to this possibly on a Wednesday. If you're not listening to it on a Wednesday, just know that Wednesdays are when these episodes drop. New episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday. And next week, we have our 175th episode, guys.
Dang.
And it is a suggestion that comes from my father, one of our like every week listeners. Most of the movies we've ever talked about, and I'll get into a little bit more about this next week. Most of the movies that we talk about, my dad would have no interest in, but he still listens. And I appreciate that. We all appreciate that, Dad.
Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah. So, but the first suggestion is The Cincinnati Kid, which is a fun little gambling movie. Little poker action.
What's his name? Steve McQueen.
Yes.
Is it Steve McQueen?
Yes. Yeah. So that's a good flick. Dad introduced that movie to me some 15, 16 years ago, I think. So yeah, I'm excited to watch it again. Also, and so yeah, go to filmseizure.com, go to all the places like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all of that stuff. We're there. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. We put everything up on YouTube just as much as we do the various podcast audio sites. We also recently have gotten a coffee place. So if you do like what we do and you wish to tip us, you can do so by going to coffee. That's ko-fi.com/film seizure. You can buy us a coffee. Or buy me a large Diet Coke, no ice at the McDonald's, or whatever. Either which way, if we split it evenly, I can get my $1 large Diet Pepsi or Diet Coke, no ice. Anyway, yeah. But also on Mondays, I do a little thing called Monster Mondays, and I wanted to say it was a little thing because this upcoming Monday is a big thing: Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. I believe many fetishes were born out of that movie. Various ones. I think I talked about some of them. I don't remember exactly. But you can go, you can just come here at filmseizure.com, check that out as well. I always talk about movies that are from a very positive perspective. There's plenty of angry reviewers out there. You can listen to that if you want to just shit on something. I try to find something positive even if the movie's not very good. Meanwhile, at my website, bmovieenema.com, I poke a little fun at some movies. This week is a truly bizarre mid-70s, old-timey, pulp fiction-y type of action hero, Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze. It is a wild movie, and I had a lot of fun watching it and writing about it. So you can go to bmovieenema.com to check that out. I think I said everything I needed to say, right?
Yes.
Yes, you did.
All right.
After you read Jeff's Doc Savage article. Was that an article or an episode? I'm sorry.
Article.
Yeah,
oh,
article.
No, that's a Warner Brothers. That's a Warner Archives deal. I can't show that one.
Go listen to our Flash Gordon episode again if you haven't. Right, those are semi-related, as I remember.
Yes,
right. A little bit related. Dick Tracy. You can listen to our Dick Tracy episode again. You can also. I feel like there's another one out there. It's very, very weird how right here, right after Vietnam, they did a movie where it was like, hooray, the United States, and we're the best at everything. And it's really, really weird. And it's interesting that we're talking about that. I wrote about that after we talk about this movie. So
Yep.
it's the polar opposite of the Beast of War. So,
interesting.
all right. Well, yeah, so we did it. Come back next week for the Cincinnati Kid. Until then, my name is Jeff Arbuckle.
My name is Chuck Moore.
And I'm Jason Oliver, and you have been listening to Film Seizure.